back into Talking Fitchburg. Joining me from the Fitchburg Fire Department is our friend Mark Malekish, right there. And he is here today to give us an update, department update. Last time we talked, we were talking about fire hydrants and snow. Yep. Now we're talking about severe weather as things warm up. But before we get to that, fire chief process continues. We had the final 3 candidates, kind of had a community forum to ask questions. We got to know those candidates more, but just a quick update, what's the path moving forward?
So pretty neat process. We had them for the public reception last Thursday, and I think all 3 candidates did a great job. I think that we have a really good opportunity to get some really progressive leadership, no matter who it is, right? But kind of a neat process to see it go forward. So this goes on to the Police and Fire Commission, and then they will announce after they've continued to tabulate scores and have discussions and decide who they think is going to be the best. But ultimately, they'll be the hiring authority.
All right, and when will we see an actual chief if an offer is made and after all the processes? Is that late May potentially?
I think at the
earliest announcement wise.
I don't know for sure because that chief, whoever it is, will need to give some time for transition in their own department.
Right.
And leaving a chief's position is a little bit different than leaving just a good old-fashioned day job. They've got a lot of responsibilities that they're going to want to hand off to their respective departments to say, hey, hopefully you can continue this program. Hopefully this is the path that we go on, and here's my notes, and here's everything that I know. So,
well, and if it is the 3 candidates that were present, they were all out of the area, so you got to pick up your life and move it to a new, so it's a process. But
it is a process.
All right, well, we'll hopefully by the next time we see you here for our update in late April, we'll be talking chief. But until then, we're going to talk about one of my favorite areas, weather, which maybe you just found out that I'm a weather enthusiast.
I did just learn. I had no idea.
He's like, oh no,
singing your song.
All right, so Severe Weather Awareness Week coming up second week in April. And we'll get to that, but we're actually, we're already getting our first taste here in March, which it does seem to come a little bit earlier and earlier each and every year. Yeah. But I bet you the first thing you start off with in severe weather discussions is a plan.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, be aware. It's harder and harder these days with cell phones to not be aware, right? We have alerts going off all the time. But really, the best thing that a person can do is, if they're able, get a weather radio and keep it in their home, because that's immediate. That is, and if anybody's ever heard the alerts go off, they're loud and they catch your attention. But that's how you know what's happening near you, right? So having a weather radio in the house is really key. But pay attention to the alerts so that you know what's going on, and then understand what those alerts mean.
Yeah, well, and I had to turn off a few of my weather radios because my wife was upset that they were going off all the time. But there's new weather alerting systems that kind of help prevent it, more focused in areas for severe weather. But just to mark too, weather radios are all hazard radios too. So if for instance the cell phone isn't operable, the radios are alerting you to not only weather, they could be alerting you to other disasters as well, which I lose sight of that when I being the weather guy, and whatnot. So another great reason to have it, because it's one piece that's should be part of your toolkit as you plan for these things.
Yep, and being ready for severe weather can be as simple as, picking up the lawn furniture, putting the umbrella down on your patio furniture, making sure that you don't have things that are going to get blown around the yard, or it can be as simple as that.
But the trampoline videos, they're so awesome to see them fly into somebody else's property.
Yeah, there is nothing like a 20-foot diameter projectile.
I laugh, but you're serious. In all seriousness, those are simple steps you can take to avoid some property damage, plus somebody else's property damage. Yep. So it's good. Let's work down the list of just a couple of the ones to get kind of familiar with here. So if we're looking at just talking about thunderstorms first, because generally speaking, we're going to get a thunderstorm. that comes through, and it's going to be severe, not severe. Knowing the differences between those, what would you like people to know?
So there are differences between warning and watches, first and foremost. A watch is basically saying, hey, look, there's a possibility that we could get some heavy weather. And that applies to blizzards, it applies to tornadoes, it applies to thunderstorms, flooding, all of those things, right? A watch is really sort of that first warning to say, you know, there's a possibility that this could happen. When it reaches the point of being a warning, that's a little more critical because now you're into the potential of it being imminent. It's coming, so you need to prepare. Understanding that, I think, would help more people sort of work through, well, what's really happening with the weather today, right? What should I be doing?
This would be a good question for you because I think a lot of fear from weather folks, even I'm assuming public safety officials, is the crying wolf syndrome. There's a watch, nothing happens. There's a watch, nothing happens. Or severe weather happens, but it's never really that bad. And then there's theories and everything else. So you start to like let your guard down a little bit.
Well, I think that's very valid. I can tell you that in my neighborhood, specifically when the tornado sirens go off, it seems to be a cue for everybody to go out to their mailbox and look up. Being a weather geek myself, that's super tempting. But what you should be doing is heading to the basement, to an area away from windows and all of that. So that tornado siren is not intended to draw you out of your house. It's intended to provide warning. And something that people, I think, don't realize about tornado warnings tornado sirens, is that they're intended to alert people who are outside. They're not intended to alert people inside of their structure. 9 out of 10 times they're loud enough to be heard inside of the structure, but the intent is to alert people who may not be inside their house at the time that something is going on.
That's a very surprising to a lot of people, I believe, that they're like, wait, you're telling me that this isn't to get me into the basement or whatever. It's just for outdoors. And it's like, yeah, it is.
Yeah, and I get questions all the time. What should we do if there's a high wind or a tornado coming through? The answer is go to an interior room. Wherever you live, if it is entirely possible, go to an interior room that does not have any windows, that you can't see the outside, lowest level of the structure if possible, and stay there until those sirens go off or that weather passes through. Too many times I think people sit in the window and watch. The window's a terrible place to be because if you have high winds, you're going to have debris and you're at risk of flying glass.
Yeah, I think back to last year, we had like a couple of weeks back to back where we had, severe weather, very crazy severe weather, and there were tornado warnings and high winds and everything. And I remember going to the basement, and it was tornado warning after tornado warning after tornado, and it lasted for almost 2 hours where I was in the northern part of Dane County. But I could see it easily letting your guard down after, it keeps going off. And you're like, well, is this really happening? Right. It really isn't. What I'm getting to, though, is one thing with the weather, I think that I was going to say something about it. I would say that you don't know what's going to happen. And sometimes tornadoes happen without warning. Yep. And I think that's also something to be said about severe weather is don't take it for granted because you don't know. You're being warned because what it could do. Right. And by taking your steps, getting away from windows, getting into that interior, that could easily, a high wind event could do the same damage as a tornado, and that could still hurt you.
Yep, absolutely. And it's all about just taking those steps. It doesn't hurt anything to go ahead and take the precautions and be a little cautious about what's happening. Especially if you have, the elderly or young kids, make sure that you're teaching them good habits, right? Like I said, in my neighborhood, it seems to draw people out to their mailbox, and that is not the right place to be if you've got heavy weather coming through.
I told my kids I told them, like, when we go in the basement, we had actually practiced a few times that day because we knew that there was severe weather coming, and what I didn't want to have happen is the shock and awe, right? Like, right. Oh my gosh, we're doing this now, everybody's crying, scared. Instead, we were prepared, we went down, we had our kit down there, and we were good to go. So I love the idea of preparing. Another area that I would ask 2 questions is practicing at your workplace, and then for people who are in apartment buildings. We do have a lot of apartment buildings here in the city of Fitchburg, so I just wonder what your comments would be about practicing. Those are 2 different scenarios. So let's start with businesses. As
Sure.
a business, when's the last time that you actually practiced at the place you work? Do you even know where that shelter is?
Do they know where the shelter is? Has the shelter been identified? Which is a great question. What is the workplace policy? Sometimes it's simple as understanding what you're expected to do by your employer, right? Because hopefully your employer's thinking about it and they've identified a place, which sort of leads to your second part of the question. If you're in an apartment, the very best place to go, if there's an underground parking structure, go downstairs into the parking structure. The upper floors are at most risk, although if you can't leave, then an interior room or a hallway where there aren't any windows is appropriate, right? But best case scenario, you head down to that lowest level. If it's a basement, awesome. If it's a parking structure, awesome. If it's a slab on grade and there is no basement, even better than the top floor would be the first floor, down inside the hallway if you can get there safely.
One final question for you is what happened, I guess, pulling the curtain back for folks as they're in their tornado shelter or they're in their shelter and a storm passes through and we've got damage in there. What is the fire department doing during this time, both whether it's a different station or whatever? Because if we do have severe weather coming through the area, are they like, well, we're in the basement too? Or are you guys leaving the city? Like, what happens? And then responding as well, because I think that's also interesting. Again, I get to be on the other side and see what's happening, but I think it's kind of cool to see and educational to understand what you guys are doing behind the scenes as well.
So first and foremost, if there's an imminent strike on a fire station, they're going to take cover just like everybody else. They have the same instructions to do, right? Because they can't go help anybody if they get caught up in it or there's injuries. Most of our fire stations have quite a bit of glass in them in the garage doors, so they don't want to be near that, right? Sometimes some fire departments will stage apparatus and act as weather spotters. I think that's a practice that is less used these days than it used to be. So generally, we're going to hold tight. We're going to stay safe. We're going to go respond to where the damage is. And most of us are trained weather spotters. Most of us are aware of it, but really our duty is to help pick up the pieces if something bad happens. So we want to make sure that we're geared up and ready for that. And the best way to do that is to keep our apparatus, at a state of readiness and keep our personnel safe.
If something happens in the city of Fitchburg, as far as communicating information out to residents as things are happening, as we're going along, how can residents stay informed about the response, things that are happening if it is disaster mode time? So,
Sure.
If a part of the city is hit. Last year we had the severe tree damage from the actually same storm I was referencing. Where different parts of the city had power lines down, everything else. Again, another piece of after the storm's over is to get outside and go check things out.
Right.
But that's probably not a good idea.
So there'll be teams that go out and look for damage, right? So they'll do damage assessments. As they do that, they'll report back, and most likely if there's an area that's been hit harder than another, we're probably going to have a press release out in a hurry. And instructions via social media, via Fact TV, via the other news outlets. We're going to get as much information out as we can. And I would offer that if there is an area, thinking back to some severe weather events that I responded to, knowing the location is not an invitation to go see what's happening.
Yeah.
Let people do their work. Let the people that are affected recover a little bit. And help. That's a big way that the public can help us out.
Absolutely. All right, Mark. Well, I appreciate the time and the discussion. I could talk about this all day long.
I see that.
Poor guy. Again, if you have any questions for Mark or the fire department, reach out. He would love to talk to you. Pick his brain just like I did here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. Give me a call.
All right. We'll catch up with you next month, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.